Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on effective reading strategies to ace GMAT RC. And again, this webinar is going to be very focused to help you improve your accuracy in RC so that you're able to get 90+% accuracy consistently on reading comprehension. And we are going to solely focus on the reading strategies that will help you do that. So it is not a webinar where you can expect shortcuts to learn, which will change your score in one day. But I'm definitely confident that you will learn a lot of methodologies, the logic behind what it requires, and it will definitely change your thought process, your approach towards RC, which will eventually change your score. So, welcome everyone to this webinar. I have about 20 plus people with me already. I see a lot of you are joining in, so feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments over here. I'll quickly introduce myself and the other host of the webinar. So I am Piyush, and I'm going to be your main host in the webinar today. I am going to start the webinar, but like there are basically two aspects that I want to bring about in this webinar. So just to give you some background, when I started my prep, I was not an avid reader. In fact, if you go ahead and read the title of this webinar, this is focused towards people who are not avid readers, who are not used to reading. So just to give you a background, when I started my prep, I had just finished one book entirely in my entire life. Okay. That's a big statement. You can understand a person. I would not say that I was not an avid reader. I would actually go to the extent of saying that I hated reading. I was that kind of a person. And because of that, I struggled a lot. I struggled a lot to get a good score on my reading comprehension. Probably that was the area which I dreaded the most. So that's one version of the picture which I'm going to talk about. And then I am going to bring up Sunita, who used to be my tutor when I just started, and how discussions with her changed my thought process around GMAT and all those things. We are going to bring about that as well. So Sunita is someone who is very experienced at RC. Probably, ma'am, you would say that you're exactly opposite of me. Like you love reading. Well, how is it?
Absolutely. There was a time when I used to finish two books about what, 3.5, 4 hours, like that. So just
Okay,
go on reading.
that's that's a lot. That's a lot of
That's
reading, to
not.
be honest. So yeah, so these are two contrasting views that you will get. So mostly first half of the webinar would be conducting by me, and both Sunita will conduct another part. But the idea is we're going to focus our attention on what you do, what you need to do. Even if you're not an avid reader, if you're not used to reading every day, what is that you do to get an high score in RC? And trust me, as I said, I was not an avid reader. I used to hate reading. Even today, probably I am. I don't read books. People tell me that you should read books. I don't read books. But on the GMAT, I scored a 740 with a verbal 41. That goes without saying that I scored really well on RC, and how it happened, what all happened, and all of that we're going to cover today. So it's going to be very exciting today. And but how we have structured this webinar is we'll first start off with the importance of reading comprehension. So we will basically first talk about why RC is that important on GMAT. Like why is reading comprehension probably the most important section out of all three SCCR and RC. We'll definitely talk about that. Then we will talk about why most people falter at RC. Like what is the main reason, the core issue that people face? Like they come to me and they say all kind of things, but what is the real reason why you're probably faltering at RC? Because unless we know what is the real reason, solving that is a very difficult job. Then we will actually move to understanding the time saving irony that okay, why do people end up taking more time just because they want to save time? That's a very important aspect, kind of related to the first aspect over here. We're going to talk about that as well, and then we will quickly move on to practicing questions again, not really in the same order. I'm just telling you what we are covering today. So we will be practicing questions for learning purposes from time to time as it is needed. So that is something that we will be doing. We'll be doing two passages and around two questions in each of those two passages. And then I'll open it up for an open-ended Q&A where you can ask any question that you have. Okay. So again, I have been speaking from a long time. So I just want to ensure that all of you can hear me loud and clear, just to ensure that my voice is audible and there's no other issue at my end. So if you are able to hear me, please just say a yes in the chat over here. I would be able to see that way and understand you are able to hear me loud and clear. Okay. So I would wait for a few responses to come in. in the meantime, let me get moving. So please let me know if you guys can hear me loud and clear in the comments. I would even if like 4 5 people respond, that would make it very clear that my voice is audible to all of you. Okay, so as I started, as I said that even before going into how to ace RC, we need to understand why RC is that important on GMAT. And this is again a very important insight which a lot of people don't have. And thank you so much for all of you for telling that I'm loud audible to all of you. That's great to know. So why is RC that important? Again, a lot of people don't know this as a fact. So let me quickly take up on this fact, and then we will move to the reading strategies as well. So in general, in your GMAT test, you can expect anywhere between 3 to 4 passages. Again, most people end up getting 4. A lot of people end up getting 3 as well. So there will be 3 to 4 passages that you will get on your test. Around 12 to 15 questions is what you can expect in these 3 to 4 passages, which basically is around 1/3 or slightly more of the total number of questions which are there in the verbal section, where there are 36 questions in verbal. So this is 1/3 or more of the total questions. Now, what you need to understand is that GMAT is an adaptive test. Now, what does adaptive test mean? Basically, the adaptive test basically means that getting consecutive questions wrong is penalized very heavily. So basically, the accuracy in the test on certain set of questions that you have solved right now will actually determine what is the difficulty level of the next questions that you get. So getting 3 or 4 RC questions is very bad on GMAT. Okay, because RC questions always come consecutive, and if you do consecutive mistakes, that actually is penalized very heavily because the algorithm starts thinking that you do not have the capability of getting the questions of this difficulty level correct. Okay, so it is very important that you understand this part. Shreyans has a question. I'm preparing for CLAT. RC comes in exam. It will help me or not? So again, Shreyans, this webinar is for reading strategies which should apply for RCs throughout, like just for RC. So it can be for any test that you're preparing for. We're going to talk about the reading strategies. So yes, it will work for you. So now, this is something which you need to understand. Now, what is the impact of this? To help you understand the impact of this, I'm giving you a case study, and this is a real life case study which was conducted. And I'll tell you the outcome from which you will understand how important is reading comprehension. So what happened was there were 3 students who took the test, and these people were they knew all the questions to the answers. Again, these was based on the GMAT official mocks. So this case study was done on official mocks, and we can easily get the the right answers to the questions. So what was done in this case study was the first attempt was done in a way that all SC questions were marked incorrect. So we deliberately marked all the sentence correction questions wrong, and we did every CR and RC question right. Okay, deliberately. Okay, so rest were all correct. And in second case, what we did was we actually did CR correct. All CR were made incorrect, and RC and SC were correct deliberately. Okay, so that was done in the second case. And let's call it student A, student B, and student C. In student C, we deliberately made all RCs incorrect. So the only difference is in one case we made SC incorrect, in the other case we made RC CR incorrect, and in the last case we made RC incorrect. Now my question to you guys is, tell me, will their scores be the same or close to each other? In the comment, you have these 3 people in front of you. What do you think will be their score? Like, will their scores be same? As in, since you are expecting a similar number of scored SCCR and RC questions, at least out of the 36 questions, there are 30 questions which are scored, and there is an equal weightage given to CR, SC, and RC. So that way, all 3 people made probably 10 mistakes which were scored and 20 correct questions. So number of correct and incorrect questions is same. But what do you think will be the impact on their scores? Will their scores be same, or will their scores be very different? I want to know from you guys, what do you think about it? Okay. Scores will vary a lot, Spurs says. Why, Spurs? Why do you think so? Okay, what about others? Spurs has shared his thought process. What do others think? Will the scores be same? Again, same number of scored questions. Okay, Cyan has a very good response, as presented it in a very mathematical manner. He says A equal to B, which is less than C. Okay, sorry, you say greater than C. Okay, so yeah, C is gonna be the least. That's what Cyan is saying. What about others, guys? Depends on the order of questions got wrong, I think. Okay, Dinesh. Yeah, more or less the order will not matter much because, like as I said, all SC were incorrect, CR were incorrect, and RC were incorrect in the case. Okay, will vary is what Annie says as well. Ritin says also it is going to be different. Okay, so great guys. Thank you so much for your responses. In fact, I'm really happy to see that you understand this well. I'll tell you the results of these three students. Student A, again, there were multiple attempts being done to just get an understanding of what the score range would be. So the student A was getting the score in the range of 36 to 37. Okay, and student B was also getting the score in the range of 36 to 37. Okay, so basically both these people got the same scores, similar scores, let's say, but student C got only 33 to 34. Whenever RC was made incorrect intentionally, the score was much lower. Okay, so Shreyans, the question was very simple. In one case we are doing all SC incorrect deliberately and all CR and RC correct. In the other case we are doing all CR incorrect. In the third case we are doing RC incorrect. So ideally the score should be similar, but the difference is there. There's about 3-point difference in the final score that you get, and that 3 point is around 20 points on the entire test. Now, what can we infer from this? So if you look at what is the difference between the three students, thus you can understand that student C got RC questions wrong. And the only difference between RC and CR and SC is that in RC questions come back to back. RC comes consecutively, and getting them wrong will affect your score highly. So mistakes in RC, especially in the beginning, can hurt your score a lot. You need to keep this in mind. And in case you're not really strong at RC, it is right time to actually improve your score in RC. You need to work a lot on RC to just make sure that you're not really RC is not your weakness, because if RC is your weakness, there's a very high chance you will make consecutive mistakes. And if you make consecutive mistakes, that's where the algorithm hurts you the most. Okay, so this is just one viewpoint that I wanted to bring about. Now let's talk about how can you improve your RC. So let's get to the main part of the webinar. So what are the common fear factors that I hear? And again, this is something which I felt as a student myself when I was preparing. As I said, I was not an avid reader. I actually hated reading. So the biggest problem I had was unfamiliar genres. When I used to get passages from science, I used to love reading them. I used to relate to them very easily. I used to get almost everything correct over there. But the moment the passage was on humanities, that was a nightmare for me. I was never able to get a consistent score. I was never confident about the answer that I was marking. Economics, maybe, may not be. Sometimes I got it right, sometimes I did not. But humanities was a nightmare. So this unfamiliar genre was a very big problem for me. Second problem that I faced was poor recall. That okay, I've read the passage, but when I go to the questions, I don't remember what I read. I did not remember. I did not recall as much. I meant to have to read the same thing over and over again. Close answer choices are another fear factor for me again. And please feel free to say yes or no if you also feel that these are some problems that you face when you solve questions. So another problem was close answer choices. Many times I used to get stuck with two choices in the end, and I was never really sure which one is the right one. Okay, and then the other common question that I had in my mind was that RC is time consuming. It eats up a lot of time to read RC passages. It eats up a lot of energy as well, mental energy drains as well, and that impacts your performance in SC and CR. So those were four common fear factors that I had, and I come across these common fear factors from other students as well. Now, one common reason when I look at it, in the hindsight, when I look at how I performed over the years, how I changed my approach, I personally feel now that all these was mainly because of the mental block that I had around reading comprehension, that I'm not great at it, and the mental block that I had when I was reading the passages. Okay, so Apeksha says exactly same kind of problems face. So Apeksha, that's very common. I can understand. I have felt myself and struggled with. And I remember my early days for the prep. I remember in the very first month, I memorized 2,000 words. Someone told me vocab is important. I memorized 2,000 words, and I was doing at a very fast pace. I was trying to add new words every single day. 2,000 words in 1 month was a big activity. I used to read newspaper for almost 1 hour every single day, and I did that for 3-4 months consecutively. But even then, I was facing these issues. So these are one of the most common issues. But the biggest reason why this happened is the mental block that we have when we're reading. So the biggest problem that I personally felt, again, and this is something which I'm going to talk about as well as we go and solve more questions. But the biggest reason why all these mental blocks are there, or why we end up not performing well on RC, is we try to scan and skim through the passage. Many a times we just scan and skim through the passage. We do not try and understand what is happening, and that's why we have to come back for answer while like come back for the to the passage while answering the questions. And many a times people read the first line and the last line only. Again, this was another strategy which was told to me by some people, that okay, if you're taking extra time, why are you wasting time in reading unnecessary information? So just read the first line and the last line so that you know what is there in the para, and then come to that particular para. Again, this is something which is basically skimming. Once again, did not help me. Similarly, reading the question first and searching for the answers, these strategies also followed by many people, but that also doesn't work. So if you follow any of these strategies, you will actually waste a lot of time, and your accuracy is often compromised because you have lack of confidence when you're answering the questions. You don't know very thoroughly what's there in the passage, and that lack of precise understanding of the passage is what costs you your score and time and accuracy, everything. So we have to move over this, and we are going to dedicate our entire session around this and understanding how to read. And there's no better way of doing that other than solving a question. So we have a question in front of us. I'm going to give you exactly 5.5 minutes for solving this question, because there's one para that you have to read and you have to solve one question. So your time starts now. You can read this from the screen itself, or if you want, I am giving you a link as well to download a PDF where you will have this question open with the passage. So it's up to you whether you want to read it from the screen or you want to download the PDF. I'm just going to share the link for the question number one over here in the comments, so you guys can see the link in the chat here. So you have 5 minutes. Those of you who would be watching the recording, who are not attending it and watching the recording later on, you can skip forward 5 minutes ahead in this recording. Or I would rather recommend that you actually download the PDF and solve it question yourself to learn more. But if you want to just skip, you can do that. But yeah, 5 minutes is what you have. Your time starts now. All the best. This is the link. It is there in the chat. You can actually download the PDF at your end or solve it from directly from here. And I'm going to be muted for next five minutes. All the best, guys. And one more thing, please, those who have solved it, please don't post your responses in the chat. Hold on to your responses. After 5 minutes, I'll ask all of you to post your responses. Please only post the responses then. All right, guys. So I guess 5 minutes are over. So I would request all of you to respond to the answer, like respond to the question rather. Post your responses in the comment here. What do you think is the right answer for this question? A, B, C, D, or E? What do you think is the right answer to this question? Please respond in the poll in the comments over here. I would like to see your responses. Okay, so let's wait. Again, your time is over, so you don't have any more time to solve this question. I've given 5 good minutes to all of you. Okay, so I see some responses coming in. Let's wait for a few more. Edwin Spurs shades D, VSP shades is B. Okay, Baka says it's D. Salam for B, Upalam for B, Subham goes also for B, Satyajit goes for D. So B and D till now. Okay. Anyone else has another thought process? Shubham goes for B, Manikanta also goes for B. B seems to be slightly more popular than D, I would say. Till now, Pramod also says B is the correct answer. Okay. Okay. What about others, guys? I have around 50 people attending this webinar. Okay, Aruba also says it's B. Shayans also says it's B. Okay, the popularity for B seems to be increasing. Okay, so great, guys. How was this question, by the way? Like, how did you find this question? Again, I have done this question a little while ago in one of my previous webinars. If any of you attended, might have looked at this. But again, this is just one of the questions that we are solving today. But how was this question overall? For those of you who are doing it for the very first time, how did you find this question? Shreyans also says it's B. Pallavi says it's B. Dinesh says it's B. Okay, B seems to be very, very gaining a lot of popularity, and I'm surprised that no one else has picked any other choice other than B and D. Okay, but yeah. So, what? How did you find this passage overall? Now, how did you find this passage when you're reading this? Let me hear some responses from you. And please be very honest with me. How was it when you were reading it for the first time? How did you find this passage overall? How did you find this question overall? Okay, Sparshas could not understand it properly. Okay. What about others? Found it easy, medium, hard? Was it baffling? What was baffling if it was just baffling? Okay. 600 to 700 difficulty level is what VSP says. It's actually a 700 plus level question, VSP, to be honest. More people have gotten this wrong than right on GMAT Club, if I go for GMAT Club data. Shayan says main point. Okay. You say those, you think it's a main point question. Manikanta says hard, slightly complicated is what Pramod says. Okay, so let me tell you my thoughts. Okay, Pallavi says it's could not understand well due to words. Edwin says it is tricky. So let me tell you some of the common thoughts that might be going on in your head. Again, this is something which I can understand because I have been stuck. I struggled as a student, and then now I have helped many people improve their scores, and I speak to so many people over the time. So let me tell you some common thoughts that go on in your mind, and please let me know if you actually felt it when you were going through the passage. One thing was the language was so dense, so it's so complicated. It was tough to understand. When you were reading it, you felt that it was tough to understand. The language was dense. The sentences were long. The sentences were complicated, and that's what led to actually a tough time in understanding. But even if you did not understand something, you continued reading forward. I want to know how many of you did that. Even if you did not understand something, let's say you read one line and you did not understand what you have read, but you still continued reading forward. How many of you did that? Salem says difficult to read and understand in one go. Good point, but what about this? How many of you did not understand, even if they did not understand the passage or some part that you read, you still continued reading forward? Okay, Dinesh says yes. Spurs says I did. Again, I am asking all these questions because I want to understand whether what I'm saying makes sense or not. Are you actually able to relate to it, or am I able to relate to you guys or not? How many of you did that? Anubhav says yes. Okay, Paz Opilam. Again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right, so I'm probably gonna use your surname. Rengarajan says the passage was difficult to understand, but the keywords help. That's a good thing. Again, I'm gonna come to that. BSP says I did, but I went back as I had left time left. Okay, I'm not in favor of the thing that you have done. I would rather say you should pause as you read and understand what you have not read before moving forward. So it's not good to come back many a times. Again, that's my personal opinion from my experience. I understand that, but I have to look back of multiple times. Shayan says I have done that. Okay, so many of you have done this, right? But very common thing which people do. Now, in the end, what happens is when you continue reading forward, if you don't understand, in the end, you only have a rough understanding of the paragraph. Do you understand? It's something about royalists, it's something about patriarchalism, it's something about feminists and their conflict, something around that. But what is it exactly? That thought process is still missing in many times if you read in this way. Okay. And what happens in the end? When you move to the questions, you're confused between two choices. Tell me how many of you were confused between two choices. Please feel free to let me know how many of you are confused between two choices and which choices were the ones that you were confused with. I can see most of you going for B and D, but I don't know whether you're confused between two choices when you're marking the answer. Okay, so tell me which choices were you confused with, and like if at all you are confused with two choices. So another thought, what happens is after this, that you have rough understanding, you end up being confused between two choices. And what is that we do when we are ending up being confused between two choices? Okay, I see some people saying yes, I was confused. Salem says I was confused between A and B. Spurs says I was confused between B and D. Okay, Dinesh was also confused between that. VSP was also confused between that. So yeah, a lot of you are confused between two choices, right? Two close choices. Now, what do you do when you're confused between two close choices? You end up rereading the passage, or at least some parts of it. You reread some parts of it, and you, in the end, mark some choice because you're not confident, and you mark the choice because you had less time. I gave you a time limit of 5 minutes, which is not less, by the way, but I gave you enough time for solving the question, reading the passage, and you still have to end up marking something because your time is running out. Okay, so I see a lot of your responses. I'm so glad that you guys responded to my queries or the questions that I asked. But exactly these are the common thoughts which go on in students' mind. And if any of these or a lot of these, at least four of these or three of these happened with you, then there is a very big issue with the way you are reading the passage, and you have to improve your reading style. Now, uh, without any further ado, I would tell you how to read. So what we'll do is we'll do a small exercise. I'll read this passage as I read it the very first time I solved it. Okay, and this passage was done by me for the very first time just a couple of weeks back, maybe around the first of in the beginning of March is when I did this passage for the very first time. Okay, so at that point of time, exactly how I read it, I'm gonna read it exactly that same way. And I want you guys to take notice of how am I reading it, and then I will ask you guys what is the difference that you find in the way I read vis-a-vis the way you read, and that way it will help you understand what is the most effective reading strategy, because there's no better way than illustrating it in front of you. All right, guys. So I hope you're excited to hear this out. So I'm just gonna come to this part. Okay. So the right reading style. Let me start. Okay. And I'm gonna bring in one line at a time so that if our focus stays on those lines. So let me start it as I was doing it for the very first time. It is an odd but indisputable fact. Okay, so I know that there is something which I'm gonna read. This is a fact which is odd. Okay, it is odd. It is not something which you can hear every day, or like it's slightly odd, but at the same time it is indisputable. As in there is no question about the validity of that fact. This is something which is cannot be disputed. Okay, and when I know that it is an odd and indisputable fact, the word it is an odd and indisputable fact tells me that this is the author's opinion, this is the author's words. Let me write A over here. This is the author's word. Okay, let's read what is the fact. I don't know yet. Let's read further. And what I'm doing here is I'm reading it exactly as I would read the first time, and I'm telling you exactly what is going on in my head. Obviously, when I'm thinking a lot faster than this, but in order to help you understand what is going on in my head, I'm speaking out loud so that you guys can understand that. Okay, so that the 17th century English women who are generally regarded as the forerunners among the forerunners of modern feminism. Okay, so this fact is about 17th century English women. All right, so this is fact about 17th century English women who are generally regarded, again, these are generally regarded as among the forerunners of modern feminism. So these English women are early adopters of modern feminism. So the fact is about this English women. What is the fact? That is something that I don't know yet. Let's read further. Are almost all identified. When I say almost all, I mean that every one of them, almost every one of them, identified with the royalist side in the conflict between royalists and parliamentarians. Okay, so almost all of the early adopters of modern feminism were identified with the royalist side. They were on the royalist side of the conflict between royalists and parliamentarians, known as the English Civil War. So this conflict was known as the English Civil Wars. And the odd fact is that every one of the early adopters of feminism was on the royalist side. That's a fact which is odd. And this is something which is stated by the author. This is stated in the author's language. Okay, so I know that this is the author's point of view, and it's very, very important that I kind of consistently steer myself in author's direction. Okay, let's read further with this. What I don't know still is why is this fact odd, but I know that this is the odd fact that all of them were on the royalist side. Let's read further. Since, okay, so I see since is generally either used as a time marker or as a cause and effect. So let's see. So probably there's a cause and effect coming in. Since royalist ideology is often associated. Okay, the moment I read the word often associated, I know that this is not the author's point of view. This is generally the case. He's saying generally people associate royalist ideology with the radical patriarchalism of 17th century political theorist Robert Filmer. Okay, so there's a theorist that we are talking about, Robert Filmer. Let's call it RF if you want to. So what he's saying is since royalist ideology is generally associated with patriarchalism of a certain guy, something happens. What is that thing that is happening? So he is going to tell us that as well. So the cause part is that since royalist ideology is associated with patriarchalism, something happens. Let's read further. Hyphen, a patriarchalism that equates, again, so now what is happening is he's not telling me the cause and effect. The effect is not coming. This part is just telling me about the patriarchalism. It's explaining about the patriarchalism. So this is a detail basically that I can probably keep on the side. I'm not saying you should avoid it, reading it, but keep on the side. Let's read still and to understand. A patriarchalism that equates family and kingdom. Okay, so this patriarchalism equates family and kingdom and asserts the divinely ordained power of the king, and by analogy of the male head of the household. Okay, so in simple terms, since it equates family and kingdom is ruled by the king, it kind of asserts that power of the king, and similarly the male head of the family is supposed to be the male person in the family is also supposed to be the main head. Basically that's the idea. Since family is equal to kingdom, kingdom is ruled by king, so family should also be ruled by the male head. That's the idea that this patriarchalism talks about. Okay, so this is a detail that we have. I can ignore this if I want to for this moment, and I still focus on the cause and effect. The cause that he was talking about is since royalist ideology is associated with patriarchalism. Let's see what happens. Historians have been understandably puzzled. Okay, so if you see this word, focus on understandably. What is this understandably telling me? This understandably is nothing but the author's point of view once again. So this is something which the author agrees with. He's saying that it is understandable that historians have been puzzled. By what? By the fact that royalist women wrote the earliest extended criticism of the absolute subordination of women in marriage. So he's saying that since royalist ideology is associated generally with patriarchalism, historians are puzzled, and it is understandable that they are puzzled by the fact that the same royalist women wrote the earliest criticism of subordination of women in marriage and the earliest systematic assertion of women rational and moral equality with men. So he's saying that it was puzzling to see that royalist women were actually criticizing the subordination of women. Okay, so he's saying since the ideology is is associated with patriarchalism, this fact that royalist women were criticizing subordination of women, it is understandably puzzling. So that's what he's trying to do with the second line over here. Let's read further. Some historians have questioned. Now remember, it is some historians he's talking about. It is not his own opinion. It is someone else's opinion, some historian's opinion. Some historians have questioned the facile equation. Again, honestly speaking, when I was reading it for the first time, I had no idea what this facile word means. Okay, to be very honest, my vocab is not that great. Okay, so I did not know the meaning of the word facile. But let's still read. Some historians have questioned the facile equation of royalist ideology with Filmerian patriarchalism. So probably this facile means similar, because earlier we were talking about royalist ideology being dependent on Filmerian patriarchalism, and here we are talking about questioning that fact. So mostly facile should mean similar or something. It's about the equation, so I can ignore the meaning. So what he's saying now is many people have questioned this, because in the second line, he said that it is generally associated with patriarchalism, but now he's saying that some people have even questioned this association. Let's read further. And indeed, now the indeed again is the author's opinion. This is his word. So I need to understand that what is being said now is this is the author's opinion, not some third party opinion. Let's read this. And indeed, there may have been no consistent differences between royalists and parliamentarians on the issue of family organization and women political rights. So he's saying that indeed there has been no consistent difference between the family organization and women political rights between royalists and parliamentarians. So he's saying that probably there's some validity in that questioning of the basis of royalist ideology. But okay, the moment I read this word but, I understand that again the author is now talking about his own opinion. But in that case, one would expect early feminists to be equally divided between the two sides. Okay, so he's now refuting the fact that probably that questioning is not valid, because if that was the case, then why would all feminists be on the royalist side? They should have been equally divided in that case. So that's the intent of the entire passage. So if I have to summarize the first paragraph for you, the author finds a fact which is odd but true. The fact is that all English women of 17th century were forerunners of the who were the forerunners of the modern feminism were royalists, and almost none of them were parliamentarians. And because second line tells us that because royalist ideology observed absolute male power, historians are understandably puzzled that women who belong to such a family criticize the male power. And some historians doubt that royalists follow feminist ideology, and authors support this. And then he says that by saying that there's no consistent difference, but then he rounds up and concludes, already observed at the beginning, that there is probably, if there had been some differences between royalists and parliamentarians, sorry, if there had been no differences between royalists and parliamentarians, then half of the women feminists should have come from the parliamentarian side. So guys, what I want you to tell me is, what is the difference that you see basically in the reading style? And please let me know you have seen exactly how I read it, and let me take you back to this part or this slide again. Okay, what you see is the difference between how I read it and how you read this. Okay, Suhit, again, that could happen if you actually are if you're confused by the filmer, if you did not focus on Robert Filmer part, that could happen. But in case if you quickly get back to it, you will be able to understand this part. But yeah, there is a possibility of what you say might be happening. But more importantly, what do you see is the difference between the thought process that I had, the way that I was reading? And please be honest with me. Please tell me your own observations. Okay, what if you found any difference whatsoever? What was the difference that you saw in the way I read it and the way you read it? Okay, Bakanoshi says you are much more thorough. Shayan says, how to know which keyword is representing author's opinion or not? I didn't get that understandably. Okay, Shayan, it's a very important question. I'll definitely answer that. Don't worry, I have that covered. I'm not just gonna tell you like what to do. I'm gonna also tell you how to do it. Okay, so we'll talk about that. But what is the difference between your thought process and my thought process? I just have one response till now from Bakanoshi. There might be some lag in your response and my questioning. So I would wait for a few minutes to see. And I would want to see exactly some interest, like comments from your side. What do you see as the difference? So Bakanoshi, why do you think I was much more thorough? Okay, break up of the passage and understanding the key point. Suraj says you focused on whose viewpoint it is. Very important point, Suraj. Earlier, I never used to do that. Earlier, my thought process was that, okay, I just have to read what is written. I didn't even think that there are 2-3 different people whose opinions could exist in the passage. My thought process was just limited to the understanding of the passage. Okay, even if you pause and read again, still don't understand, then what to do? Okay, so Sparsh, again, if you're pausing and you're reading properly once again, you will definitely understand. But if you're not understanding even after a reread, it's better to move on. But it's not good thing to move on with absolutely no understanding. You should have some question in mind. Okay, as you were saying that, seeing that when I was reading, I was preempting what is going to come next. I might have had some questions in mind, but they were limited to some words or here and there. But if you're reading again and you're still not understanding, that could be mostly because you're reading too fast. Okay, so Daniel says you stop to analyze each 2 lines. In my case, I read straightforward without analysis. Okay, Bakanoshi says you actively look for keywords and what they represent and how they relate to the rest of the information. Okay, so I thank you so much for these responses. Anyone else wants to tell me their viewpoint? See, again, my reading style is very different from many people, in the sense that when I was reading, I was not trying to read fast. Okay, I was not trying to read fast. I was trying to contextualize. I was trying to understand every bit, because if I do not read by contextualizing, I'll not have no idea about what's happening. I will only read what is written there. I will not understand why is it written, what is there in between those lines. And trust me, on more than 85% of the GMAT questions are about why is it written, inference based questions, and you will not get them right. So Suraj has a very important point that you are asking questions that helps to be involved. Yes, you have to ask questions, you have to preempt, you have to involve yourself in the passage. And this is a humanities passage, guys. I was never interested in reading humanities. Even today I'm not interested. But for me, what is important is getting a high score on GMAT. And if for that, if I have to involve myself, I have to involve myself. There's no other way around. And this is a very dense passage, by the way. This is a very, very dense passage. Okay. And I'm not saying to you, you saw that I was not taking any notes. I did not take any notes. I was trying to contextualize things. In fact, today also, I only write down 5 to 7 words for one para, maximum, not more than that. And I've seen people taking lots and lots of notes. I have done that myself also. That, okay, after each line I was writing down, okay, what is there in this line and then the next line. If you start taking notes like that, you're probably focusing on what is written and not how is it written. Okay. So again, Shreyans has another point. He says, I was in time pressure due to time-bound questions, so not 100% efficient. So Shreyans, honestly speaking, when I read this for the first time, this first para, it took me 3.5 minutes to read. Okay, guys, I'm writing this on your screen. It took me 3.5 minutes just to read the para. And I'm not talking about answering the question. Just to read the para, 3.5 minutes it took me. But that was one single read. And I can bet on this as a fact that more than 90% of you who are attending this webinar today did not spend 3.5 minutes on the first read. Most of you read it the entire para in 2 or 2.5 minutes maximum in the first time. I'm not saying that you did not spend 3.5 minutes on reading. You probably spent 4 minutes on reading, but that was broken across 2 reads or 3 reads. Okay, but I spent 3.5 minutes on the very, very first read. It took me time to read it, but it only took me 40 seconds to answer the question because of my level of understanding of what was written over there. Okay, and this is when I read it for the very, very first time a few weeks ago, as I was talking about it. Okay, so many a times we think about time pressure. You have to solve the question fast, and then we cut corners on reading the question, and that's where you struggle. That's where you actually end up taking more time and you get the question wrong as well. Okay, so enough of that. So very quickly, this is what we understood from the passage. So in simple terms, this passage tells about that given the background on ideologies of two sides, it is odd that all English women who were forerunners of modern feminism were on one side of it, were on the royalist side. That's what the passage tells us. Now let's move to the question. Okay. Now the question asks us, why does the author actually introduce Robert Filmer? Why does he talk about Robert Filmer? So if you look at Robert Filmer, he is mentioned in the second line of the passage. Okay, the second line of the passage that we read. Now, if you look at it once again, you understand that Robert Filmer was just mentioned to introduce the ideology of patriarchalism, what it meant. The ideology was frequently associated with ideology that royalists held, and the Robert Filmer's ideology or royalist ideology was all about the male power of the king. That is basically what is told to us in this part. Okay, this part tells us that. But the purpose of referring to Robert Filmer was to show that the beliefs of royalist women were in stark contrast with the royalist ideology. And how do I know that? The simple reason is that this author is saying, since royalist ideology is often associated, just give me 1 second, guys. So he says, since royalist ideology is often associated, historians have been understandably puzzled. He is talking about that as a fact, that he's agreeing with historians, puzzled with the fact that royalist women wrote the earliest criticism of the absolute subordination of women. So this is why he is mentioning Robert Filmer, because he wants to point out to the fact that there was stark difference in the beliefs, basically, that there was stark contrast in the beliefs of early feminists and the royalist ideology. That's what he wants to point out. Without mentioning Robert Filmer, he cannot point that out. Okay, so Mykola has a question. Is it better to start with questions and then look at the text trying to answer the question, or fully read and then go to the question? So Mykola, if you have been with me in the argument in this webinar now, you probably know the answer to this question. It is definitely important to read the passage properly and then go to questions. Okay, if you're just reading the questions first, it is not going to work out. Then you're working on the belief that it is important to know what is written. It is more important to know why is it written, guys. Okay, so let's quickly move on. So let's look at the question option choices. Option A, again, none of you picked that up. Very easy to eliminate. Also, show that royalist ideology was somewhat more radical. Again, he's not talking about whether royalist ideology was more radical or less radical than what historians seem to appear to realize. That is something which is not really there. So the objective is not that. So basically this is out of scope altogether. Okay, so let's look at choice B. Again, one of the most popular, in fact the most popular choice, on even on GMAT Club, more people marked B as the correct answer than D. Actually, D is the correct answer, B is not. But more people marked D as the correct answer. Now, if you read it like I read it and you have understood this, you will understand why this is wrong. Now, it says that qualify the claim. Okay, now understand this part. In the second line, the author says that royalist ideology is often associated. So he's talking about the claim that patriarchalism formed the basis. There is a claim, like many people claim that patriarchalism forms the basis of royalist ideology, but he is not doing anything else with that claim. He is not qualifying that claim, supporting that claim, weakening that claim. He is not doing anything. He's just saying that people claim that royalist ideology is based on patriarchalism. That's all. He's not qualifying the claim. Qualifying basically means that you're limiting the strength or meaning of a statement. You're putting some restrictive conditions to it. That's not what he's doing. Okay, he is just saying that there is this claim, and since this claim exists, the fact that royalist women wrote earliest criticism of subordination of women is puzzling. That's the idea that he has. But if you basically you're just stuck to what is written in the passage and you have not understood the intent, why is it written, you will actually definitely get this wrong. You'll mark B as the correct answer because most of it talks about the correct things. It talks about the claim, it talks about patriarchalism form the basis of royalist ideology. It is what the sentence starts with. But if you do not focus on the why and you just focus on the what, you will get this question wrong. So to those of you who marked B as the correct answer and were confused between B and D, definitely you need to improve your understanding of the intent. If you focus on the intent, this will be a very easy option to eliminate, in my opinion. Okay, so please make sure that you are focusing on the intent next time around when you are solving the questions. Okay, so let's move to choice C quickly. Okay, what's wrong with choice C? It says question the view that most early feminists were associated with royalist faction, and in the very first sentence it says that this fact is indisputable. So there's no talk about questioning the fact. So definitely this is out of the premise, opposite of what is being stated. Definitely not the right answer. Option D matches with our pre-thinking. This is exactly what we thought. He's mentioning Robert Filmer to highlight an apparent tension between the royalist ideology and the ideas of early feminists. There was a tension, there was a difference in opinion that exists. Why that exists is probably something we will know later, but he wanted to highlight this apparent tension. Okay, last one. Argue that royalists had conflicting opinion. Again, he's not arguing. He is not at all arguing that royalists had conflicting opinion. There's no argument that is happening over here. This one also is incorrect. Okay, so if you see, the key difference between the right reading strategy and the wrong reading strategy can simply be highlighted as focus on reading speed. Let me put it, focus on reading speed versus focus on comprehension speed. So if you look at the thought process, most people, why they get RCs wrong is they focus on reading fast. They focused on improving their reading speed. And that's why you hear such advices from people that you should read 1 or 2 hours every day. You should read this, you should read that, because that's solely focused on one simple thought process, that the more you read, the faster you read, and the faster you read, the better you get. But no, guys, trust me, my reading speed today is probably half of your reading speed. It is definitely half or maybe even lesser. I read much slower, but I comprehend much faster. And that's what is the key difference between me and any of the other people who are struggling with RC. And if you change it, if you change your focus from reading speed to understanding, you will see a huge difference, not in just your scores, but even in your timings. Trust me, you will actually be able to solve the questions much faster. This might sound to be a little awkward to you, but you will actually solve this question much faster. As I was saying earlier also, I read this question, this paragraph in 3.5 minutes. And this is not the entire passage. There was one more para to it, which I will use at the second as the second question today. But I read the entire passage in 5 minutes, 3.5 for the first para, 1.5 for the next para. I was able to read the entire passage in 5 minutes. And the 4 questions associated with it, I solved them in less than 4 minutes, around 3.5 minutes or 4 minutes approximately. And I got all of them correct. And this was a 700 level passage, guys, 700 plus level passage, very dense passage. And I could get this right just because I had a very, very strong understanding of what is being written in the passage. So you have to focus on your comprehension speed, and that's the key to master reading comprehension. Now, how do you do this? How do you do all this? How do you understand all this? So this is the right thought process. The right strategy for reading is you should read in an involved and evolved manner. And what is involved and evolved reading? I'm just summarizing what I did today. So start thinking like the author. You have to understand the author's point of view. At every single point, you should be continuously steering in which direction the author is taking the discussion. You need to understand that really, really well. And in order to do that, you should break sentences into smaller chunks so that you're able to derive the exact meaning of the passage, of the sentence. Okay, so again, Shreyans, the passage that I've taken might be harder, but the hard passages give us the most important lesson. So that's why I've chosen this passage to solve. For subsequent sentences, once you have derived the meaning, you should relate back to the previous sentences. As you was able to see, I was relating back what is happening, what has the author done till now in each and every line. It helps you to understand what the author is trying to tell you. Use transition words and conjunctions to your use to the maximum, and summarize the passage as you go. Summarize each paragraph. So in order to build the right skills in RC, these are the things that you have to do. You need to know where to pause. It is not just important to pause anywhere. You have to pause at the right points. You need to understand where to pause. Then you need to take care of complex words. There were many complex words when I was reading this passage. You have to understand, contextualize. You have to differentiate facts from opinions. Okay, what are facts? What are opinions? And once you differentiate that, you should also differentiate the author's opinion from the rest of the opinions that are there. You need to understand which side the author is taking, and then you need to focus on understanding the intent. Why is the author writing it? Is this clear to all of you guys? Is this approach clear to all of you guys, how you should be reading? Quick yes no over here in the comments. I have not seen any comments from your side from a long time. Just want to ensure that all of you are clear with this. Let's see some responses. Is this approach clear to all of you? Any questions around this approach? Please feel free to ask me. Okay. Sanjida says yes, pretty much. I'm really glad to know that you have clear idea about it. Okay, Shreya says yes. Pramod also says yes. Great, guys. I'm so happy that you are able to understand this approach. And trust me, guys, I was not that lucky. No one told me how to read passages. Everyone told me how to answer questions, but not to how to read passages. And once someone told me that, my score changed tremendously. My thought process changed tremendously, and all of that happened. Now, if you want to learn the skills, if you want to build the skills in a step-by-step manner, I'm just telling you how you can do that. Again, these are the things that you have to do. But if you are a GMAT student, you will actually find very detailed lessons on this in our course. So this is a snapshot from the GMAT course on reading comprehension. And it just shows you the level of detail which is there in Unit 1. Unit 1 is what you see. This is where we teach you how to read. And you can see that there is around 9 hours of lesson just dedicated to teaching you how to read a passage. 9 hours of video lessons, including concept boosters, questions, and everything, where you learn one skill at a time. First, we teach you how do you place yourself in the author's place. How do you put yourselves in the author's place? Then we teach you how to take care of transition words and opinions. So someone was asking, how do I know? Understandably is the author's opinion. We teach you that. We give you small exercises for you to perfect that. And then we help you understand how do you relate all these things together and summarize each and every para. How do you understand the intent of each and every para? So if you have to go through a thorough job, you have to build these skills one step at a time. And in fact, in order to understand where to pause and all, you also have to start doing sentence correction from a meaning standpoint. So that is also very critical. So please make sure that you structure your prep in this way. It is not that tomorrow or a fun fine morning you start studying in this manner, you start reading in this manner, it will work out. You have to understand all these things, and if you understand all these things scientifically, you'll be able to get a better score. And this is just a snapshot of one of the slides which is there from our course. If you're a GMAT student, you'll find it in your course very easily. You can see what is the purpose of opinions, we are talking about it, and a lot of other factors. Okay, so please make sure that you build the skills in that way. With that, let's transition over to the second question. Again, as I said earlier, this passage actually had two paras. I just took one para for our first question. I have the second para also over here now. So this is one more question which I have given over here. You can solve this question using the screen over here, or I'm also giving you the link in the comments. If you want to open the link uh, and view the PDF at your end in bigger font, you can do that. So here's the link for the second question. For this one, I'm going to give you about 3 minutes approximately, because you have already read the first para in depth. So you just need to read the second para and then solve the question. Okay, so all the best. You have 3 minutes to solve this question at your end, and then I will resume. I'll be muted in the meantime. All the best, guys. Okay, guys. So nearly 3 minutes are up. So you guys can start putting your response in the comments here. Like, what do you think is the right answer to this question? What do you think is the right answer to this question, guys? Feel free to post your responses in the comments. And I've just given you 3 minutes because, again, the first para you have already read. Okay, so Michaela says could be C. You're not sure. What about others, guys? What do you think is the right answer? Okay, Spurs also says C. VSP says it C. What about others? Definitely a slightly easier question if you have actually solved the first one, because you have some idea about what this passage is talking about. So that helps also. Suraj says it's C. Okay, so C seems to be the only answer, but only 4 people have responded. I'm not sure what is the thought process of other people. But again, we are slightly running behind schedule, so I'm gonna quickly start solving this question without any further ado. And we have already talked a lot about in depth about the reading strategy. So maybe I'll read through this second para just slightly faster, not that much. Again, when I say read through, it's not like I'm reading faster. I'm not gonna go as much in depth about what's going on in my head. Okay, but still do it. Catherine Gallagher argues that, again, I'm talking about some Catherine Gallagher. I don't know who that person is. Okay, so the author is talking about her, argues that she argues about something. What does she argue about? Royalism engendered. Again, if you don't know the meaning of engendered, don't worry about it. I also did not know the meaning of engendered, but you have to use your thought process, contextualizing skills to understand what engendered probably meant. Let's see. Argues that royalism engendered feminism. Realism engendered feminism. So if I try to understand the meaning of engendered, probably engendered should be encouraged or maybe started, because in the previous para, the author was talking about royalist women being early adopters of feminism. So most likely engendered means it started or it encouraged or something like that. Okay, that's how you try and understand the words that you don't understand from the context. Okay, Catherine argues that royalism engendered feminism because the ideology of absolute monarchy, okay, monarchy is about, again, the kingdom, something like the king and all. Monarchy provided a transition to an ideology of the absolute self. Okay, so she's saying that since absolute monarchy was the idea of royalism and patriarchalism that was there, that actually led to the transition to the ideology of absolute self. From absolute monarchy to absolute self is how people started thinking. So maybe the women started thinking about themselves as absolute self. That's probably what Catherine argues. She cites the example of notoriously eccentric author Margaret Cavendish, Duchess of Newcastle. So she cites an example of some author. Let's see what she does by citing that example. Cavendish claimed to be as ambitious as any woman could be. So Cavendish was someone who was very, very ambitious. But knowing that as a woman, she was excluded from the pursuit of power in the real world, she resolved to be the mistress of her own world. So basically, since she was very ambitious, but at the same time, she knew that she has some limitations, she had resolved to be the mistress of her own world. What was her own world? Let's see. The immaterial world. Okay, this world was immaterial that any person can create within their own mind. Okay, so she tried to be in complete control or mistress of her own world, the master of her own world. And as a writer on paper, so she's saying that this Cavendish person, the author, was a master of her own world in her mind, on paper also. In proclaiming what she called her singularity. Okay, so she called something as her singularity. Let's see what. In proclaiming her singularity, Cavendish insisted that she was a self-sufficient being. She was self-sufficient being within her mental empire. So within her mental empire, she was self-sufficient, the center of her own subjective universe, rather than a satellite orbiting around a dominant male planet. Okay, so she was the main person. She was the center of her own universe rather than revolving around a male planet. So it talks about uh, the thought process that Cavendish were self-sufficient in a way. Okay, in justifying this absolute singularity, Cavendish repeatedly invoked the model of absolute monarch, and in order to justify this, she was invoking the model of absolute monarch. Now, if you relate, you can understand how that absolute monarchy actually provided a transition to the ideology of absolute self. This is where the author is trying to relate this. Okay, Cavendish repeatedly invoked the model of absolute monarch, a figure that became a metaphor for the self-enclosed, autonomous nature of the individual person. Cavendish's successors, okay, so her successors among early feminists, okay, so her successor among early feminists retained her notion. So these people retained her notion of the women's sovereign self, but also sought to break free from the complete political and social isolation that her absolute singularity entailed. So they even went ahead and actually basically broke free from the fact that it was isolated in the mind itself. It was more around basically the overall thing. That's what this passage tells me now. Okay, so in simple terms, the author introduces CG's argument to perhaps explain the oddity of the fact. CG believes that royalism gave birth to feminism. Why she believes that? She believes that the royalist idea of absolute power of the monarch led to the power of absolute power of self in feminism. CG gives an example of Mary C to support her argument. Mary C used the idea of absolute monarch to create a self-sufficient being in her immaterial mind. And author now talks about how Mary C's successors followed in her footsteps, but with a difference. Instead of talking about the immaterial self, they talked about the general scenario also. Okay, that's what the author talks about in this passage. Now, if I look at the question, if I go back to the question very quickly, where is the question? Yes. So the question says, which of the following, if true, would most clearly undermine means weaken, okay, undermine Gallagher's, okay, so Catherine's explanation of the link between royalism and feminism. So we have to weaken the link between royalism and feminism. Okay, so first we need to understand what was the link that was there between royalism and feminism. Let's understand that. So CG believes that royalism gave birth to feminism. Okay, and she's saying that the power of absolute monarch led to the power of absolute power of self. This is the linkage that she's actually showing. You need to understand the link, because unless you understand the link, you cannot weaken it. Okay, and in order to support this link, she talks about Mary C's example. So to talk about this linkage, she brings up Mary C. So in order to weaken this link, we need to show that royalism did not facilitate the birth of feminism. We should be able to do that. So one way of doing that would be to show that Mary C's idea were not common. We see that, okay, Mary C is one of the royalist women, but what if the ideas were not common among the other royalist women? If the idea is not common at all, then it cannot lead to other people, other women also thinking in that direction. Okay, so that is one weakener. Another weakener would be to show that how some other ideology gave birth to feminism. So we need to look for those choices. Let's look at choice A. Why choice A is incorrect? Because of their privileged backgrounds, royalist women were generally more educated, better educated than their parliamentarian counterparts. Now, this thing, if the royalist women were more educated, then this will only again kind of support the link between royalism and feminism, probably, because again that would kind of say that since royalist women were more educated, they were probably able to think about the feminism and the subordination better. But again, this is not related to what the line of thinking that Gallagher has, so it does not really weaken that line of reasoning. Okay, let's look at choice B. Filmer himself had read Cavendish early writings and was highly critical of her ideas. Again, Filmer has nothing to do with Cavendish as per the passage, and even if this information is provided, it makes no difference to the link if he read Cavendish writings, because Cavendish writing is completely different from that. That does not change the thought process. This is out of scope. Again, these are typical choices which GMAT has. Now, Cavendish views are highly individual and were not shared by other royalist women who wrote early feminist work. Now, this is definitely a weakener, because if this is true, then Cavendish view are not really material. That's what it tells us. So this is definitely a weakener, and this is indeed the correct answer. And I'm glad to see that most of you got the correct answer as well. Now, let's look at choice D. Some people might end up marking choice D. It says the royalist and parliamentarian ideologies were largely in agreement on issues of family organization and women political rights. This does not weaken the linkage between royalists and feminism. Okay, it just tells us that royalists and parliamentarian ideologies had some similarity, which is mentioned in the first para. So if you're just stuck with the first para and if you're not understood what is the rationale in the second para, you might as well end up marking this answer. So this is distortion or half truth. This is definitely not the correct answer. The royalist side included a sizable minority faction that was opposed to the more radical tendencies of Filmerian attackism. Again, this supports the link that there were some people, there was sizable minority which actually was against it. It said that some royalists were opposed to royalist ideology. Definitely not a weakener. If at all it is something, it is a strengthener. Okay, so remember guys, it is very, very important for you to understand the passage. And if you see, I did not initially, if you look at this process of reading which I talked about, it is not that initially all itself you will be able to do it very quickly. Initially it might take a little bit of time to get used to this thought process of reading and pausing and contextualizing. But if you do it often, with practice, this process will become a second nature, and you'll be able to map the passage, understand the flow of ideas, and derive the author's point of view in very quick time. In fact, you will be able to solve the questions on an average within 2 minutes. Because the good thing is, you even if you take a little more time to understand the passage, you will actually not take a lot of time to solve the questions. Okay, and we are actually, again, this webinar is a very short webinar where we cannot get into a lot of depth into individual areas, but we are actually conducting a free webinar series over 10 weeks. It started in on Feb 13, but we still have 5 weeks left where 10 webinars are yet to be conducted, and these webinars happen on the weekends. So in case you would like to join this webinar series, this is completely free. We are covering all different topics starting from quant and verbal and all of that. Okay, so it is important. If you want to register for this webinar series, you can do so by using this link which I've just shared with you in the chat. You can take it up. Michaela has a question. If you see that C looks correct, should we check D and E too or move on? I would say, Michaela, please do check D and E and eliminate them on strong grounds. That will increase your confidence level when you're marking the answer. I always do that because you need to understand why one answer is right and four are wrong. Okay. In fact, I'm going to hand over the discussion to Sunita very soon. He has an entire discussion scheduled on around answer choice elimination. So she will talk about much more in depth of that. But in case you want to attend more webinars or your GMAT prep on different topics, you can attend this webinar series. And in case you want to even connect with me one-on-one for a call to discuss your study strategies, you can do that using this link. I'm going to hand over the webinar now to Sunita. From over here on, Sunita is going to take up the next part of the webinar. And as I said, we are two contrasting people, and I'm sure you'll have a great time with Sunita now.
Hello, guys. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me, guys. All of you, can you hear me? Am I
Yes,
audible to
ma'am.
you?
Your
Okay,
voice is
I'm
audible.
all
Yes.
right. Great, great. So, Piyush, without any more ado, if you could just share the PDF for the second passage. So,
I'll,
guys, the second passage has two questions, and I'm
I'll,
going to give you 7 minutes to solve those two
and you can
questions.
also.
Yeah, can
Yeah, and I think
right.
I've just shared the link for the question 3 and question 4 in the chat with all of you guys. And I guess, ma'am, we can just do question number 3 because we'll have a little shortage of time. I guess
All
we are
right,
already
great,
at 1
great,
minute 15,
wonderful.
15-minute mark. So
So,
just solve question number 3 from this PDF, and yeah, that will be good.
all right, guys. So I'm going to give you then 5 minutes to solve question number 3 because you've got to read both the paragraphs for solving it. And I'm going to mute myself in the meantime. So go ahead and I'll just start sharing my screen once you have finished going through the PDF. So go ahead, guys. The first question of the passage only. That's it.
Ma'am, we can also have the screen open in case someone wants to read it from the screen, just in case.
Guys, I think just taking time for the screen to show up at your end. Just let me know if you can see the screen. I think there it is on. Sorry for that, guys. Okay. Uh, the line 29 basically refers to uh, contradiction that is mentioned in the second paragraph. So here your line would be, I'll just point out the line number. Mm, 1 second. Yeah. So the second last line, Surit, refer to the second last line for apparent contradiction. All of you refer to the second last line of the second paragraph where the words apparent contradiction has been mentioned. All right, guys, you have just 1 more minute and then I'm going to ask you to put in your answer choices. Not now. All right, guys, you can start putting in your answer choices. Your 7 minutes are up. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to put in your answer choices. I'll wait for your answers. We're going to be a little bit quick about the whole thing without compromising on the comprehension, on the methodology. And then I'm going to talk to you about the importance of answer choice elimination and understanding how to eliminate them. Yes? So let's see. I'm waiting for the answers to come in. It seems people are still reading. Okay. And I hope you like this passage too, another one of the humanities. All right, so Bakanoshi is saying he has marked it as D. What about the others? I think at mind it's the answers are still not reflecting. So just bear with me, guys. And again, coming back to the topic, so this was another passage on humanities, another one of those dense passages, short and sweet, but lots of information. The first paragraph itself had a long, long, long sentence. So let's see if I can get some more answers and then we can move ahead. But we don't have time, so I think I'm just going to quickly move to the analysis of this paragraph. And here it goes. Okay, let's start reading. Antonio Castaneda. Okay, so there is somebody called, let's call this person AC, all right, has utilized scholarship. Now, let's say I don't know what utilized and scholarship means. I have a certain idea about scholarship. I can think of scholarship of, fees and stuff like that, but let's not jump right now. So AC has utilized as in used scholarship from women's studies and Mexican American history. Okay, so then I can say that Antonia Castaneda has used, let's call scholarship works from women's studies and Mexican American history. Why has she used works from women's studies and Mexican American history? All right, to examine 19th century literary portrayals, that is depictions of Mexican women. So when I read this line, I tell myself, okay, the author is introducing the subject studied by AC. And what is that subject? The subject is how 19th century the literature portrayed Mexican women. All right, so 19th century literary portrayals of Mexican women means how Mexican women of the 19th century were portrayed in the literature of that time. Okay, let's read further. As Castaneda notes, so okay, here we are going to talk about what Castaneda has understood or noted from these studies. Scholars of women's history observe. Okay, so Castaneda is noting something about the scholars of women history. Let's read on. Castaneda notes, scholars of women's history, that means people who write women's history, observe that in the United States, male novelists of the period, which period? The 19th century that we are talking about. All right, so here, Antonio Castaneda is talking about some scholars, and these scholars have made an observation about some male novelists in the US. Okay, what is this observation? So now further, again, we have these two dashes, which means we have information within brackets, you can say. This period is being defined now. The period in which these male novelists wrote something about the women of that period, that's been mentioned here. During which, so in this period, we are being given some information about this period. According to these scholars, women's traditional economic role in home-based agriculture. So at that time, in the 19th century, women were involved in home-based agriculture. And since the word economic has been mentioned, ideally it must mean that they were somehow financially involved in the home-based agriculture. They were probably working in home-based agriculture to earn money. So during this period, women's economic role was threatened. That means the economic role took a back seat, pushing by the transition to a factory-based industrial economy. Okay, so I've got lots of information here. In the 19th century, there was a change from the home-based agriculture to factory-based industrial economy. And at that point of time, women's financial or economic role took a backseat. It was threatened. All right. So male novelists of such a period in which women's economic role was threatened, okay, the male novelists of this period, they define women. So let me kind of connect this. Male novelists of the period, they define women solely in their domestic roles of wife and mother. All right. So Castaneda, what she has noted is the male novelists of this period, they identify women only by the domestic roles of wife and mother, not in their economic roles, because the economic role was threatened at that time. So we've got what Castaneda, what the subject was she was studying. She was trying to study how Mexican women were portrayed in literature. And this is very important to remember because this sets the tone of the passage. This tells us what is to come. Then we have what she has noted about the male novelists of that period. All right, these novelists saw women only in the roles of domesticity. Next, let's carry on. Castaneda finds that, okay, so another finding about Castaneda's, and before that, let me quickly wrap up this. Okay. Castaneda finds that during the same period, so in the same 19th century, okay, so Castaneda finds that during the same period that saw, all right, so this period saw non-Hispanic women. Now, I don't know who is non-Hispanic women, but I do know non-Hispanic women would be one subset of women. So if women is one set, okay, if this is women, non-Hispanic women would definitely be one subset, okay. Being economically displaced. Okay, so these non-Hispanic women are women who were economically displaced by that industrialization. All right. So during the same period, and that here is kind of giving us extra information about the period, Hispanic law, okay, in California protected the economic position of Californianas. Now, who are these Californianas? So there is this another subset of this women, probably it's given in the bracket. These Californianas were Mexican women of the territory. Okay, so I'm guessing that non-Hispanic women were economically displaced. So these must have been non-Mexican. Okay, these must have been non-Mexican, and Californianas were Mexican. Okay, and therefore now here what I get to understand is AC notes a difference between Californianas and non-Hispanic women. She notes that California laws, the Hispanic laws, protected the economic position of Mexican women, Californianas. Okay, so the Mexican women, the Hispanic women in that sense, they were not economically threatened at that time. However, the non-Hispanic women of that time were threatened in terms of their economic roles. All right. So all in all, if I have to summarize this paragraph, the author, let me just clear this up quickly here. Just give me a moment, guys. This, if I summarize the paragraph, it introduces Castaneda's area of research. What was the area of research? Literary portrayals of Mexican women, and explain one of Castaneda's findings. What is that finding? The difference in economic status between Californianas and other American women. So these are the two highlights of this paragraph that we can get. Let's quickly go to the next paragraph. All right, let me just take a quick peek at the answers that some of you have put in. So I've just got D and B so far, guys. I hope you guys will put in some more answers. So Rohaki, I'll answer your question in a moment. Just hold on. For Castaneda, now we are continuing with that thought. The laws, which laws? The laws, the Hispanic laws, those are the only laws which are mentioned in the previous paragraph. Those laws, they explain a stereotypical plot. Never mind if I don't know the meaning of stereotypical, but the laws, the Hispanic laws explain a plot, and this plot is created by male non-Hispanic novelists. Remember in the first paragraph, we were talking about how male novelists of that period portrayed women. So here the Castaneda is talking about how the male non-Hispanic novelists of that period created a plot. What was the plot? The story of an ambitious non-Hispanic merchant. Okay, so we have a non-Mexican or non-Hispanic merchant desirous of marrying an elite Californiana. All right, so the plot is about how a non-Hispanic merchant is ambitious, wants to make money probably, and wants to marry an elite Californiana. All right, so the plot is a fortune-seeking non-Hispanic man wants to marry a rich Hispanic woman. Why rich? Because she has property rights. The laws have given her some property rights. She's economically secured in that sense. Okay. Let's read on. These novels favorable. Now, which novels? The novels written by male non-Hispanic novelists, which had this plot. These novels favorable portrayal of such women. Which women? The Californianas or the Mexican women is noteworthy. Now, if the author is saying here it is noteworthy, we must also take note, because so far we just had Castaneda says this, Castaneda found that, Castaneda said something like this. But now here, this line is not attributed to Castaneda. This line is there for the author's words. So the author is telling us The fact that these women were portrayed, these Mexican women were portrayed favorably in the novels of that time is noteworthy. Why is it noteworthy? I think the author is going to tell us because there is a sense coming up. All right. So, AC notes the contradiction here, and the novels show Californianas in a good light. Now, I'm going to come back to this. Let me hold off here. Mexican American historians. Now, the reason why this portrayal is noteworthy, we are about to find out that reason. Mexican American historians, okay, so historians who are writing about the Mexican American history probably have concluded that unflattering literary depictions of Mexicans. Now, Mexicans here means which Mexicans? So again, I'm going to draw out a kind of Venn diagram. So let's say this is Mexicans, which means Mexican men and women. All right. So, unflattering literary depictions of Mexicans were vital. So, Mexicans had to be shown in a bad way in literature. Why? In rallying, that is, getting the United States public support for Mexican American War. All right. So, at that time, some war was taking place between Mexico and America. And at that point of time, it was very important to get the United States public support for this war. Therefore, what what the authors would do would show they would show all the Mexicans in general, in a very unflattering manner. All right. Now, here it is to be noted that Californianas were portrayed favorably, but other Mexicans, which included other men and women, that means women who were not Californianas and men, they were shown in an unflattering light. All right. Okay. So here is there is a contradiction that is noted. The novels show Californianas in a good light, but the novels portray the common Mexicans in a bad light. All right. Let's read on. The importance of economic alliances forged through marriages with Californianas. Okay. So now, what does this economic alliances mean? Probably it refers to the marriage between the Californianas and the non-Hispanic men, okay? Because it was given that they were ambitious, they wanted to make money. So the marriages were done for the sake of money, therefore economic alliances. All right. So here probably the author is explaining why Mexican Californianas were portrayed favorably and why the other Mexicans were not. The importance of economic alliances made through these marriages with Californianas explains this apparent contradiction. Now, since we already have a question on this, we're going to talk about this later also. But right now, I'm asking myself, which apparent contradiction is the author mentioning here? Well, just prior to this line, the only contradiction that was there was novels showing Californianas in a good light, but novels showing the common Mexicans in a bad light. So the reason behind this contradiction is that the marriages with Californianas were economically important. That is given here. Okay, let's read on. Because of their real life economic significance, the Californianas were portrayed more favorably. Okay, so the reason given to us here is these Californianas were portrayed more favorably because they were marrying the non-Hispanic men, and the non-Hispanic men were also probably non-Mexican people of the US, and therefore these Californianas could not be shown in a bad light, right? Okay, so the summary of this paragraph is that here Antonio Castaneda explains how the Hispanic laws, which were favorable towards the rich Mexican women in California, were responsible for the favorable, portrayal of these Mexican women in the novels by non-Hispanic men, which were, okay. And these non-Hispanic men probably were against the other Mexicans, and that is why they were portrayed unflatteringly. So from these two paragraphs, what we get to understand is the passage is all about what Antonio Castaneda started to explore. She wanted to find out how the Mexican women were shown in the literature of that time, okay? And the literature of that time showed these women in a favorable light. All right. So let's move to the question straight away. Let me see if I have some more answers, guys. Okay, I do have some answers. I have B and D here going on. Fine, let me carry on with my explanation. Let's see. Choice A. So the question is, before we read the question, sorry, my bad. The apparent contradiction mentioned in line 29 refers to the discrepancy between. So discrepancy means the difference between, or whatever difference or contradiction that is there. Now we've already identified that the contradiction is about the favorable portrayal of Mexican women, the Californianas, and the unflattering literary depictions of Mexicans. Okay, so let's read on. Let's see which choice matches our pre-thinking. Legal, so the discrepancy is between legal status of Mexican women in territorial California and their status in. So this portion, if you see, is not even mentioned anywhere. So this is totally out of scope. All right. And how the legal status of Mexican women was mentioned in the first paragraph. So this idea is familiar and taken from there. So this choice is using half truths, okay, and half distortions, familiar ideas from the passage, and concocting an answer choice and confusing students. So this is a typical trap laid by GMAT, okay. So here we have a distortion, total distortion, and therefore this answer choice is, sorry guys, incorrect. So let's cross out A. All right, this is out of scope partially, the second half. The first half is part of the truth taken from the paragraph, but it has got nothing to do with the discrepancy. So overall, we'll say this is an out of scope answer choice. Okay, let's go on. So we'll read from the question. We'll read the answer choice by joining it with the question, because the question is a half sentence. The apparent contradiction refers to the discrepancy between unflattering depiction of Mexicans in novels, yes, and actual public sentiment about the American war? No, this was not the other end of the contradiction. Definitely, unflattering depiction of Mexicans was one part of the discrepancy, but the other part was not about public sentiment. All right, so again, see, this is a typical case of distortion and half truth, as we call it. Half truth in the first part and a distortion in the second part. So that is also out. Those of you who marked B or chose B, I hope you understand why B is not the correct answer. C says, existence of many marriages. So apparent contradiction refers to the discrepancy between existence of many marriages? No, definitely the discrepancy does not refer to many marriages between Californianas and non-Hispanic merchants. And definitely this portion is not even mentioned. Strictures against these Californianas men expressed in novels. No strictures were expressed against the Californianas in the novels. So choice C is anyways totally out, all right? The apparent contradiction refers to the discrepancy between the literary depiction of elite Californianas, yes, favorable depiction of elite Californianas, and the literary depiction of other Mexican individuals, yes, and this is correct. So because we understood this, we clarified the apparent contradiction when we were reading the passage itself. Right now, we don't have to go back to the passage and refer to it again. All right, it saves you a lot of time, the involved and evolved reading, as Piyush has already mentioned that. Novelistic, so again, I'll eliminate E also, although I'm sure that D is the answer. I'm going to eliminate E for the right reasons. And we're going to talk about that in a while. The apparent contradiction mentioned in line refers to the discrepancy between novelistic portrayals of elite Californianas' privileged lives. Now, this portion is a little off, and the actual circumstances of those lives totally off. So this part is off. This just begins to use some familiar words. So again, a distortion of what is given in the passage, and therefore outrightly away. Now, what I need to discuss with you, and a very, very important aspect, as you have already seen, is how each of these answer choices uses some familiar ideas and words and phrases from the passage, weaves them together, gives them a twist, and presents to you. And if you've read your passage in a hurry, if you have not learned about these kind of twists and turns, or let me put it this way, if you have not learned about certain traps, you will make mistakes. In fact, I'm sure a lot of you might have felt like when you read this question, the apparent contradiction, a lot of you must have thought, okay, let me go back to that part and reread that portion. All right, do you think this works? This local inference, does it work, that you go back to a particular portion of the passage to locally draw some inference and leaving out the global inference? The global inference means you are having a complete understanding of the passage. Does this work, guys? Okay, it doesn't. A lot of you would have seen that it doesn't, and which is why you got the question wrong. See, understanding a particular idea in the flow of the rest of the passage is way easier and complete. When you go back for bits and pieces of information, you get bits and pieces. Your understanding is also in bits and pieces. And because the answer choices are also constructed like that, with some bits as true and some bits as false, you will end up choosing incorrect answer choices. Okay. So local inference doesn't work, guys. You have to understand the entire passage. In this case also, for you to be able to understand the apparent contradiction, you should understand what Antonio Castaneda was trying to do right from the beginning. She was trying to understand how Mexican women were portrayed in the literature. And then she came down to talking about how other Mexicans were referred to in the literature. So you have to join the whole thing and get the complete understanding. Most of the students end up picking choices which cover some familiar words from the passage, and this is called a distortion trap. So apart from this local inference trap, okay, which kind of leads to distortion trap, you land up choosing the wrong answer. In fact, there are other RC common traps. You know, GMAT loves to lay traps for students. There are traps of confusing words. You've seen words like qualify and argue and question, things like that. Traps of limited scope. Again, we don't have time to explain each of these, but these are the different traps. But problem is, most of you realize this trap only after you've solved tons and tons of questions. You've wasted time, you've wasted energy, you're also probably frustrated that your RC is not improving. Okay, it's not improving because you are not trying to understand these traps. It's very, very important that right from the outset you understand these traps. Okay, a GMAT switch student learns about these traps early on and understands how GMAT plays with them. So it is very important that when you're solving the passage, for every question that you eliminate, for every choice that you eliminate in the question, you must categorize why you are eliminating a choice. You must categorize it as, okay, this choice is out of scope, this choice is a distortion, this choice is a limited scope. Okay, how once you do this, you will be able to see that there is a pattern that is forming, and once you recognize that pattern, you will not fall in those traps again and again and again. So unless and until you tally the reason why you chose a choice and why you rejected a choice, you have to tally the reason of your choices while you're reviewing the solution. Unless you do this, unless you have chosen a choice for the right reason, you haven't actually got the question right, even if you mark the right choice. All right, it's so this your strategies of solving the passages won't work unless you read the passage in depth. Your analysis of the answer choice, as in whether it's a distortion or an out of scope, won't work unless and until you know your passage, you know the scope of your passage. It's this taming the traps is very, very important. And if you are a GMAT student, you are already doing this right from the outset. We teach you to do this right from the outset, guys. All right. In fact, here is an example of how one of our student, Akshar, improved from 650 to 730 in just 24 days. And here are some of the things that he did. Piyush will put up the link for a detailed debrief with Akshar if you want to know more about his journey from 650 to 730. But here are some of the things that he did, which I've been talking to you about and which Piyush has been talking to you about earlier on. So he improved his understanding of the methodologies, okay, the methods that he was applying to approach the RCs. He reviewed the solutions in depth. Like, he did not just solve the passage and leave it at that. He reviewed the solution for each answer choice in depth for the correct questions too. You know, most people analyze the incorrect questions and that too the incorrect choices, but they don't evaluate the correct questions. There's a lot of learning there, guys. He learned to identify patterns in incorrect answers. Okay, this is a distortion. This is how a distortion choice is made. This is how an out of scope choice is made. This is how an opposite choice is made. So he learned to recognize how the GMAT test takers were setting the traps, And then once he understood that what kind of questions he was getting repetitively wrong, he revisited the weak areas to improve his understanding. Most of all, he believed in himself during the test. He believed in this process. He stuck to it diligently. He just didn't try it for one day and give it up. And that is how he transformed a 650 score to a 730 in just less than a month. All right. So, right early on, a GMAT, if you're a GMAT quiz student, you can learn about this traps in our answer choice elimination stage. So, ACE is answer choice elimination stage, and you can see that we have dedicated almost 2 hours just to teach you about these traps, with the help of examples, with the help of detailed explanations, also giving you practice quizzes to test out whether you've understood those traps or not. All right, and this helps you set up your reading and comprehension. It becomes a complete thing then. So what Piyush explained to you was all about building your reading skills with involved and evolved reading. And then a very, very important strategy is also to eliminate answer choices by spotting those traps correctly. So you need to learn about those traps right on. So I'm going to hand over to Piyush again. I hope you guys have followed this. So Piyush, I'm going to mute
Thank you so
myself.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was really helpful. I'm sure that people would have seen two very similar viewpoints from two very different people. One who struggled to get to that level in RC, and another a seasoned tutor. But if you are able to see the commonality, it's around that thought process, those reading strategies that you need to adopt. And I hope that this webinar helped you nudge in the right direction, think in the right direction. And if you're ready to think in that direction, my recommendation is that you start working on pause points, you start working on breaking the sentences and contextualizing. That's the key that you have to focus on. With that, we have kind of come to the end of the webinar here. So I'm opening this webinar to the Q&A session, open-ended Q&A session. In case you guys need to talk about any questions that you have apart from the ones that we discussed today, feel free to let me know over here. And I have a question from Shubham. He says, I want to buy the course. Please share the link. So if you want to check out our courses, I'll quickly give you the link to our pricing page. You can actually check out the details over there. So just give me 1 second. I'll just probably get you the link. Give me 1 second, Shubham. In the meantime, anyone else has any queries, please feel free to let me know in the comments here. And if you really like this webinar, if you benefited from this webinar, I would really request all of you to like this webinar and share it with your friends who are actually struggling with RC. I'm sure this webinar series would have helped you get a good idea about how you can improve your performance in reading comprehension. Again, the details to connect with me are on your screen. You can mail me on my email ID, which I've shared a little while on the screen, piyush@gmatris.com. You can even get in touch with me on my phone number, which is there on the screen as well. And in case you want to schedule a one-on-one discussion with me, you can also do that. I'll just quickly share the link to schedule a discussion with me over here. So that is also shared in the chat. I have one more question from Rocky. Will it help if you're running out of time, like 2 RCs in last 15 minutes? So again, a very good question, very similar to should we still do this? Like basically, Rocky, what you are assuming here is that you will be taking a lot more time using this methodology than by any other method. And trust me, if you use this method properly, you'll be solving RC questions within those 2 minutes. If you're not using this method and you're using any other method, you will take more than 2 minutes to solve the question and get it right. And if you are rather doing RCs without putting 2 minutes, then probably you're not doing it wholeheartedly. So in simple terms, to answer your question, the right approach is, if you are short on time, do less questions, but do them properly. And if you use the method that we're talking about properly, you will only need 2 minutes per question maximum, not more than that. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Rocky. If you have any other question, please feel free to let me know. Okay, Let's see if there's any new question. Okay, so Siddharth is a question. I just came here. I gave my GMAT yesterday and burned it badly just because of RC. I want to discuss with your real-time plan in 1.5 months. So, Siddharth, if you want to discuss the real-time plan, we can definitely help you. You can definitely uh, like schedule a call with me using this link. I'm just showing the link once again on the screen, so you can schedule a call with me. We have helped many people improve their scores. Significantly. In fact, many of them have worked with Sunita as well. So we would definitely love to help you. So let us know. uh, Connect with me over a call, schedule a time using this link, and we will get in touch. Okay. So Rocky, I did not get your question. You said reading question mark, but I did not get the question. So it will be great if you can elaborate what question you had. In the meantime, anyone else has any questions, please let me know. Sorry, reading time plus question solving. Yes, reading time plus question solving will take you 2 minutes per question if you're doing it properly using the method that I told you. In fact, when I was taking my GMAT, I took 1 minute 50 seconds for every RC question on an average. Even the first question that we solved, that passage, as I said, it took me 5 minutes to read it and 3.5 to 4 minutes to answer the four questions correctly associated with it. That's 8.5 to 9 minutes. That's 2 minutes something, some extra seconds for per question, but that's a hard 700 level question. And on GMAT, you'll have easy questions, medium questions, and hard questions. So overall, on an average, your time for RC would be 2 minutes per question. The thing is, the way we showed you how to read this methodology, you have to practice. Initially, when you practice this, you might take 5-7 minutes or even 10 minutes to read the passage. But as you practice this methodology on 15-20 odd passages, you'll get better at it. And then you will only take 3-4 minutes to read the passage in this way. For a hard passage, you might still take 5 minutes, but that's what is needed. Okay. Sure, Siddharth. I look forward to having a word with you. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to be here for a couple more minutes to answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, you can just directly connect with me later on if you want to discuss your strategy. I'm also giving you a link to create a free personalized study plan in case anyone of you is interested in getting a personalized study plan. You can use this link to get access to a personalized study plan at your end. Okay. So Siddharth is saying that it's generally the unfamiliar fields that you are getting stuck with. So Siddharth, basically, I can challenge you on this. You give me any passage to read. You give me any passage and I can make you understand that passage. Okay, it's not about the context of that passage that you're not understanding. It's about you're trying to go through it too fast. That's why you don't understand it. And let's do a call on this. As I said, like, book a call and you bring up any passage, any difficult passage, and I'll convince you that you can understand that passage. The only problem is you're not reading it right. And that's what we did today. Like, the entire session was focused on reading it right. So if you go ahead and go back to the session also, you'll be able to understand that part. Okay. But I can definitely bet on this. You give any complex passage, any level of passage, you bring it with yourself, and we will definitely solve it together. And I'll show you how you can understand that yourself without
So
any
Piyush just
assistance.
wanted to add one word out here. So Siddharth, this is
Sure.
addressed to you. For me, science, maths are not the forefront. So there was this passage on quantum tunneling. Trust me, I have no idea in my life what is quantum tunneling. All right, and there were correlations between speed and velocity and lots of things. But I understood that passage just by breaking down my sentences into small chunks, understanding the words and relating them together. You can do that. As Piyush was saying, any passage can be understood that way. Thank you, Piyush.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for chiming in. And this is something which I can totally relate to. So, yeah, same advice for everyone, not just Siddharth. Just make sure that you're not just bogged down by a certain genre. You can actually nail it. You just have to make yourself involved. You have to put in that effort. And as human beings, we don't want to put in that effort. We want to get everything served on the plate, but that doesn't like help you on the test like GMAT. You have to put in that effort and you have to learn the right skills to get there. So work on both the fronts and that will be great. Okay. So I don't see any other questions in the comments. So I guess most of you are clear with the questions. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me or on the details which are shared on your screen. I'll be more than happy to catch up with you guys. All right. So all the best. A very good night to people who are in India and on the east side of India. People who are in earlier time zones. Good morning, good afternoon, based on wherever you are, and have a nice day going forward. All the best. Thank you, ma'am, for joining. Also, thank you so much.
Thank you, Piyush. Thank you, everyone, for being such a nice audience, such a nice interactive audience. All the best.
Bye bye.